So first one, consider the following statements with respect to different laws to deal with the pandemics like COVID. First one, National Disaster Management Authority is headed by Home Minister and National Executive Committee is headed by Prime Minister for effective response. Second thing, there is comprehensive law called Pandemics Disease Management Act that is invoked to deal with diseases like bubonic plague, cholera, etc. Third one, even though health is a state subject, Epidemic Diseases Act 1897 empowers the central government to take steps to prevent the spread of an epidemic. I know this is a bit difficult because these provisions are going in detail about the laws, but kindly see the statements and mark your answer, and then we'll see the right solution. So the main reason why this was in context is because in March there was a huge controversy because we don't have any effective law to deal with pandemics like COVID. We only have either Disaster Management Act or to deal with the natural disasters like floods, earthquakes, or we have Epidemic Disease Act. And this Epidemic Disease Act was also formed somewhere in 1897. So there was huge articles, editorials coming up in Hindu asking government to frame one comprehensive law about COVID or COVID like pandemics to deal with them. Okay, so that is why this was in news. So in that context, this question was framed. So the reason why I'm explaining this context and the history behind this is you also have to think in this perspective. So whenever you see an editorial or whenever you see a piece of information in the Hindu, you should see it from a UPSC perspective, how the questions might come in prelims or even in the mains. In the mains, the same question would be something like, there is no comprehensive law for India to deal with the pandemics. So what are the measures so far government has taken and what is the suggestions you can give? So this is a kind of mains question that you can frame out of the information. Okay, so coming back to the question here, the first statement is wrong because I've interchanged there. It is NDMA is usually headed by Prime Minister. Okay, and always remember the executive committee or implementation part is usually headed by ministers or secretaries. So that's why it was reversed. NDMA is headed by Prime Minister and executive committee is headed by the Home Secretary. So the first statement is wrong here. So regarding this, we'll see again in the slide in detail about the NDMA Act and all. So the first statement is wrong. Second statement is definitely wrong because we don't have that law. That is why we used various other provisions. So second one is also wrong. And finally, third is the only statement that is correct. Even though state health is a state subject, this using this Epidemic Diseases Act, center can actually issue the guidelines. And that is how our Prime Minister or Home Minister is issuing lockdown 1, lockdown 2, all these kind of instructions. So the third statement is right here. The answer is C. Now we'll see the different laws in detail. So as you can see here, there are three laws mainly. One is Disaster Management Act, National Disaster Management Act. And the second thing is Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897. And third is Section 144 of Criminal Procedure Code. Section 144 we have already dealt in detail. It is about imposing curfew. So how this came in this context? This is because you can impose a district lockdown by using Section 144. So that is Section 144. And in National Disaster Management Act, you have separate functions to deal with all the disasters from natural or artificial. And you have three kind of tier mechanism. At the center, you have National Disaster Management Authority. In the state, same one, State Disaster Management Authority. And in the district, it is a district collector who is the last tier of the disaster management response. So part of this act only, we have National Disaster Response Force as well, NDRF. And then you have NDRF funds as well. Okay. So these are the three structures that are there: finances, force, and then management. So in the management, NDMA is headed by Prime Minister, whereas SDMA is headed by Chief Minister. And then finally, you need to know what is a disaster according to the NDMA Act. This is also important. So according to this, don't try to remember this entire definition. The simple definition is that any calamity which is beyond human capacity to cope, if it happens, okay, and impacts every aspect of life, then whether it happens artificially or naturally, then it will be categorized as disaster. Okay, so that is the essence of this entire definition. So for example, even sometimes a biological disaster can also be classified as a disaster. Like if there is any Vishakhapatnam like gas plant break and it impacts huge number of lives, even that can be, even though that is a human made, that can also be categorized as disaster. And then finally, Epidemic Diseases Act. So here it is very important to note there are four important provisions. Okay, and you have to remember these provisions because it is very important from this year point of view. So here you have four sections. The first section deals with the extension of the law, like to what extent it will be extended. So it extends to whole of India. Okay, so that is what section 1 deals with. And then you have section 2. Section 2 talks about the powers that are given to the state and central government to take special measures. So according to this, they can impose the lockdown, they can stop any vehicle, and they can start checking it. So usually in the normal circumstances, state government or central government cannot do. But it is using section 2, state government can do, and it is section 2A that empowers central government to impose certain lockdown or that kind of instructions. And finally, section 3 deals with penalty. So if you violate these restrictions, like if you gather more than 4 people, or if you visit public places, like how we have seen in lockdown 1.0, then you will be entitled to, or you will be booked under the punishment. Okay, and then finally section 4. In the section 4, the district collector will have all the powers under this epidemic act in the district. So those officers will not be prosecuted under any rights or any under other provisions. So it is a kind of giving legal protection to the officers implementing this act. Okay, this is also very important. So these are the 4 sections of epidemic act. And then finally, if you remember, at that time there was huge number of attacks on doctors and nurses whenever the patient dies. So that because of that, central government brought an ordinance saying, new ordinance, that any attack on the doctors or health workers will be a cognizable and non-bailable offense. So that is also important. So that is how they have amended the Epidemic Diseases Act. And this is a punishment range. Like this punishment range is not that important, but the important fact is the offense will be a cognizable and non-bailable offense. And then finally, we all focus usually on either COVID or other kind of diseases, but there are other things based on which this act came up. That is bubonic plague. So that is why I've mentioned few facts about this plague as well. So if you can see, plague is a main disease usually caused by a bacteria, and it is found in small mammals like rats or that kind of animals. And it is usually found in 2 forms. One is bubonic and second one is pneumonic plague. Pneumonic, the word pneumonic means it affects the lungs. Okay, and bubonic is something related to the bubes, that is swollen nodes. So wherever you have lymph nodes, that will be swollen because of this bacterial infection. And the treatment, obviously, as it is caused by bacteria, it is antibacterial treatment. So that's why few facts about plague are also important. That is about Epidemic Diseases Act and the different laws present under this Indian government to deal with pandemics. So maybe after this COVID, they might go for a new bill called COVID Act or Pandemic Diseases Act. But right now, as we stand today, we don't have any comprehensive law. This is another important fact you have to know. Okay, so coming to the second question, consider the following statements with respect to no confidence motion that was seen in news. So this is also again very much in news constantly because of many state governments. Like you already know, there was an issue happened in Madhya Pradesh and then Rajasthan, and even before that Karnataka. So that's why kindly once again go back to all the motions that are there, like no confidence motion, censor motion, and then you have adjournment motion. So kindly know the difference as well. Okay, this is also very important for this year's prelims point of view. So here we will see the second question. So first statement, it is based on the principle of collective responsibility of executive to both houses of parliament. Second one, it can be initiated by any member of both houses and required 50 members to pass the motion. And third one, there is a time limit of 90 days between the 2 consecutive no confidence motions to provide stability to the government of the day. So kindly read these statements once again, because these statements are basically beyond the understanding that is provided in Lakshmikant or usual knowledge that we get about no confidence motion. Because this question I have intentionally framed to ensure that you read the question statements very carefully. So once again, read those statements carefully and mark your answer. And then we'll see like what are the kind of traps, like similar traps UPS also does, because this is very important. Okay, if you don't read certain statements twice or carefully, you will end up marking the wrong option even though you know the answer. Okay, so coming back to the answer here, I'm saying the first statement, read it carefully. The first part is correct here. I'm saying it is based on the principle of collective responsibility of executive to both houses of parliament. So here, till collective responsibility of executive, it is correct. But is it answerable to both houses, or is it answerable to only Lok Sabha? So this is the trap I'm talking about. It is answerable only to the House of People. So that's why first statement is wrong. And if you know the first statement is wrong, second statement is also wrong on the same logical reason. Because I'm saying here, it is initiated by any member of both houses. So you can see this both houses as a small keyword, but that is the important trap. As it mentioned both houses, even though rest of the statement is correct, the second statement is wrong here. Okay. And the third one, have you ever come across in Lakshmikant or anywhere that there is a time limit between two no confidence motions? There is never. Because if that is the case, then we will not have change of governments very quickly. So that's why third statement is also wrong here. So the answer is D, none of the above. So we don't have any time limit. And kindly remember this also, if you come across certain information which is not present in Lakshmikant or what you have not read so far, kindly ensure that or ask that question statement critically. Okay, is that kind of sounding extreme? Because sometimes UPSC willingly brings these extreme statements, and it appears for us that like we didn't read, but it might be a fact. Okay, so kindly question those statements critically, only then you will be able to eliminate those options. So here the option is D. So again, here are a few statements and facts about no confidence motion. So this is a kind of revision for you. So you all know that Article 75 states that all the Council of Ministers are collective responsible to the House of People. So this is from where I've picked up. And second thing, if this motion is passed, then all the ministers of both the houses, even though it is passed by Lok Sabha, both the houses ministers will be resigned and the government will be dissolved. And second thing, the source is very important. Is this provision mentioned in the constitution, this no confidence motion? No, it is not mentioned in the constitution, but it is derived from the fact that the minister should be collectively responsible. So it is mentioned in rules of procedure and conduct of business in Lok Sabha. So this is again important source. And then other important fact is the member need not give any reason for moving the no confidence motion. This is again main difference between no confidence motion and censure motion. In censure motion, the member has to give a reason, but in no confidence, they don't have to give any reason. So try to link this also logically. Because it is no confidence on entire government, you don't need to give any reason. And next thing, it can be passed only in the Lok Sabha, and the speaker has to take up the motion. So for the speaker to take up, 50 members have to pass initially. Once the 50 members pass it, then speaker will give, or in a maximum of 10 days, he will take up this motion. And then majority of the house should pass this motion to make it into effect. If the majority of the house passes it, then the government stands dissolved, or the government has to resign. Okay, the government of the day has to resign if the government loses a confidence motion. The no confidence motion is accepted by the majority. So that is a statement. And the vote for this motion can be conducted through three ways. One, voice vote. Second one, division, or there is other one also, paper ballot kind of voting. Okay, and finally there is no time limit that must be adhered to between no confidence motions. Okay, and finally this is the difference table between no confidence and censure motion. So kindly go through it quickly. So I'll highlight two differences mainly. First thing, the censure motion should state the reasons. And second thing, the censure motion can be moved against individual minister also, as the word censor means you are censing some other minister for certain conduct. So you can include even only one minister, whereas no confidence is for entire government. You don't have confidence on the entire government. And another thing, if no confidence motion is passed, then the government has to resign, whereas in the censure motion, it is up to the minister either to resign or not. Okay, so there is no mandatory thing. Censor motion is basically to like censor certain acts of a minister or to provide displeasure of the Lok Sabha towards that minister. So this is the main difference. So kindly go this way for the other motions as well, like adjournment motion and all. Okay. So now, so consider the following statements with respect to Essential Commodities Act 1955. First one, it is applicable only to farm goods like pulses, edible oils, and cereals, etc. Second one, it is basically intended to prevent hoarding, black marketing, and artificial spike of prices to exploit consumers. Third one, recently government has passed ordinances to remove commodities such as cereals, pulses, oilseeds, edible oils, onions, and potatoes from the list of essential commodities. Okay, so kindly once again read those statements and mark your answer. Then we'll see the right solution for this. So here again, this Essential Commodities Act is also very important this year because there are two things that happen. One is an economic survey. The government economics survey has suggested to remove this Essential Commodities Act because it is actually suppressing the prices for the farmers. So it is destroying their incomes on one hand. On the second hand, during the COVID time, we have invoked the same act to prevent the shortage of supplies. So that's why it is very, very important this year. So the first statement is absolutely wrong for the same reason. If you see in the COVID time, what are the main shortages? It is not the pulses or edible oils. It is the PPE kits and masks and sanitizers. So the first statement is wrong here. It is not only about food items, but also non-food items like fertilizers and other medical things. And even government can add to the list or remove from the list. So that's why first statement is wrong. And second statement is correct. It is the act. It makes sense from the second statement. So the second statement is correct. And third statement is also correct because part of Atmanirbhar Bharat, government, especially Modi, has said that we will remove these farm food items from this to improve the incomes of farmers. So that's why they have done it also. And even it is mentioned in the Independence Day speech just day before yesterday. So second and third statement are correct here. So the answer is D. Now we'll see this in detail. So the context is the same as we have mentioned. Masks and hand sanitizers have declared as essential commodities during the COVID time, and the main intention of the act is basically to control the production, supply, distribution, trade, and commerce. So every aspect related to the goods. So usually it is associated with the drugs, that is medical drugs and fertilizers and the farm products, and even the petroleum. The fuels are also added under this list. But now, like government also has a provision under this act to add any item whenever it wants to in certain emergency circumstances. So that's why this is very important. And you also have to know the objective of this act. The objective is mainly to arrest the spikes of artificial prices. Second thing, black marketing. And third thing, to basically improve the supplies. It is not intended to reduce the prices for the farmers or something. Okay, it is only enacted with a positive intention. But because of certain disadvantage of this act in farm goods, they have amended these three ordinances called this Farmers Agreement on Price Assurance. In this, they actually allowed farmers now to engage with the large processors or aggregators, because earlier, because of this Essential Commodities Act, no private investor or no other individual or company can store the farm produce, because if you store, then it falls under the act and you'll be liable to punishment. So now by this agreement or by this ordinance, farmers can associate with big aggregators like food processing industries to sell their produce or store them and sell them in the later phase. And similarly, in the second one, they can move interstate, okay, from state to state and also within the state. Earlier also it was prohibited. Like for example, whenever the onion prices are spiked, usually these kind of agreements come into force. But now they have also been removed. And finally, directly an amendment was made to the Essential Commodities Act where they removed cereals and pulses, oil seeds, and onion and potatoes from the list of Essential Commodities Act. And this is a kind of very, very big move for India in the context of farm liberalization. Okay, it is also important for the mains point of view also. In agriculture liberalization, you can quote this point. and there are many initiatives that are taken up this year after the COVID. So those are the amendment. So coming back to the fourth one, another important thing while this entire COVID thing was playing out is we had this release of QS World Rankings, university rankings. As usual, we didn't improve very much. We were at the same state, but this was again important from this year point of view. So consider the following statements with respect to institutions of eminence and QS World Rankings. First one, no Indian institute is ranked below 150 in the QS World University Rankings this year. Second one, it provides the regulatory architecture for setting up for upgrading of 20 institutions as world-class teaching and research institutions called institutions of eminence. So this is related to institution of eminence scheme. And third one, greenfield or new institutes are not considered under this scheme. Fourth one, both private and public institutes selected under this will get funding from the government. Again, so here also, if you don't know very much about this, but you have very vague idea, even then you can attempt this kind of question by applying certain kind of logical deductions. Okay, we'll see that. So kindly mark your answer and then we'll see, we'll go statement by statement. Okay, so here if you see, I'm saying the fourth one, so kindly see the fourth statement. I'm saying both the private and public institute selected will get government funding. Government itself doesn't have many funds. Why it will fund private institutes? So from that logic also you can remove the fourth one, because even though government may select certain private institutes, it will never give funding. Even for public institutes also, it is providing in the form of loans or grants. So that's why the fourth statement is absolutely wrong here. So once you eliminate the fourth, C and A options are gone for you. So it is only between A and B. Okay, in A and B also, all you have to know is third statement. If you know the third statement, then you can straight away mark the answer. Even if you don't know the third statement, still you can go with the probability of 50% between A and B. Okay, so this is how try to like select which questions to attempt, which one not to attempt. So here if you see, the greenfield or the new institutes are not considered. This is again wrong, because greenfield institutes are also considered. The main example is here, there was a big controversy because Dhirubhai Ambani Institute was selected, because that institute is not yet present in the field. Okay, it is only on the paper, but still it was selected for institution of eminence. That's why many people have questioned, including greenfield institutes. So that's why greenfield institutes, that means new institutes, can also be considered under this tag of institution of eminence. So the third statement is wrong here. So the first and second are correct. And the first statement, as it says, we don't have any IIT in the top 150 rankings, or to that matter, no institute. And second thing, these are the 20 institutions that will be selected, 10 from private and 10 from public. Now, so the answer is A once again. So here, these are the latest rankings in 2021. So IIT Bombay stands at top with 172, and then comes ISC Bangalore 185 and Delhi 193. Okay. Now, apart from these rankings, as such, rankings are not important. Which institute ranked what and all. What is important is the parameters, because that is very important on which the rankings are based. So here, if you see, most of the ratings are based on reputations or perceptions. You can see here academic reputation 40%, and then employer reputation, and then you have faculty students ratio, citations, international faculty ratio, and international student ratio. If you see why India is not performing good on these indicators, you can see from the parameters itself. Indian government also claims that because Indian institutes are not global, you don't have global students coming and studying in India. So you don't have certain kind of perception or reputation for Indian IITs. Okay, so that's why we score low on almost 50%, from 40% that and 10%. So that's why we have low score on rankings as well. That is why you can now logically connect why India is going for, or Indian government is going for, study in India program, where in study in India, it is asking other foreign students to come and study in India. So this way it is trying to correct this anomaly. So this way it is trying to build the reputation. Similarly, there was another program where foreign professors are invited to teach in India, where they give certain incentives. So these are the schemes that is providing. So this way also you can link and remember, instead of rote learning the exact these things, weightage or parameters. Okay, and then coming back to institutions of eminence scheme, this was mainly framed to correct this anomaly where we are not present in the top 150. So to correct that, government said we will pick up 10 institutes from public and 10 from private, and will give them autonomy and will give them certain funding so that they can break into that list. So that is institutions of eminence scheme. Now we'll see how these are selected. First thing, public institutions. These 10 public institutions will be selected based on the same QS 2020 world rankings. Okay, if these are not present, then QS 2019. And similarly for the private institutions, both QS India and National Institutional Ranking Framework. So this is again very important. National Institutional Ranking Framework is a kind of same scheme like QS rankings, but it is done by Ministry of Human Resource and Development. Okay, so that is a difference. So as we are not having the criteria, international criteria, we developed our own criteria to evaluate our institutes fairly. So based on that concept came National Institutional Ranking Framework. So as you can see here, greenfield institutions are also considered under institution of eminence, and they will be given 3-year period to basically to establish and operationalize after granting the status. And the benefits what the institutes will get out of this scheme is, first thing, autonomy. So they will be given greater autonomy and freedom to decide in these parameters like fees, course duration, and governance structure. So it's a kind of maximum autonomy for the institutes. And then if you are a public institution that is selected under institution of eminence, then you will get a government grant of 1000 crores, okay, over a period of time, not in 1 year itself, over a period of time they will get to improve their physical resources. And then finally you have NIRF. So as I said, MHRD releases this report every year, and here the parameters, if you can see here, these are the parameters that are taken by NIRF. Those are teaching, learning, and resources, first parameter. Second one, research and professional practices. Third one, graduation outcomes. Fourth one, outreach and inclusivity. And fifth one, peer perception. So here you see peer perception is only last parameter and it has very less weightage. So that means we are giving less weightage to the perception and giving more weightage to the objective features. So that's why we have framed this NIRF. So as I said, 90% are objective and 10% on subjective parameter of perception. So that is all about different frameworks to evaluate higher education institutions. This is also very, very important. You have another scheme called ARIA as well. Okay, ARIA is also a comparison framework. So try to see that, but it is now outdated. Now the NIRF, QS World Rankings, and Institutions of Eminence, these are very much in use. So kindly study once again them in detail. So this is the latest NIRF categories. And one more thing, while QS rankings is specific, here you have different categories, like right from colleges, universities, and then you have medical category also, and you have law institutes also covered under NIRF, and architectural and dental. So this way it is more comprehensive. Okay, and these are the institutes if you want to see the facts. So with this, we'll go with the next question. Consider the following provisions. Okay, provisions here, provisions of Indian Constitution to provide judicial independence. First one, the Supreme Court judges are provided security of tenure by not giving them fixed term, but by fixing retirement age to 65. Okay. Second one, SC judges can be removed, or Supreme Court judges can be removed by President on address by Parliament, which is supported by a special majority of each House of Parliament. And third one, there is a ban on practice of Supreme Court judges after retirement. So kindly once again read these statements in the recent context and then mark your answer. We'll again see this statements one after the other. So here also, the main reason why this question is in context, because you all know one of the Supreme Court CJI was appointed to Rajya Sabha. Okay, that too based on the nomination from the central government. So that's why there was a huge uproar and controversy. So on background of that, you need to know different provisions that are there in Indian Constitution which grant this independence. So this is again important from both prelims and mains. Sometimes in the mains also they might ask, like, what are the provisions provided in Constitution to maintain the independence of judiciary. So part of this, if we see the first statement, it is absolutely correct, because you don't have a fixed tenure like president. Like if you see, president has certain tenure, like for example MLA has 5 years. Okay, but does Supreme Court judge has anything like that? He doesn't have. So he's only tenure is fixed by the retirement age of 65. Similarly for High Court, the retirement age is different. Okay, so this way the retirement age is fixed, not the fixed term. So the first statement is correct. And second one is also correct. This is the removal process. And this is present in Article 124 of 4, where it talks about the removal. So Article 124 talks about both appointment and removal. So that is second statement is also correct. And third statement is also correct. There is ban on practice. So when we say practice here, it is about practicing as a legal practitioner. Okay, not being appointed to the official positions. We'll see different provisions that are granted in Indian Constitution. So you know the context already. So we'll straight away go to the provisions. First one is Article 50. So this talks about first provision that talks about separating judiciary from the executive. So based on this provision only, Supreme Court struck down the National Judicial Accountability Act. Okay, that NJAC bill, Supreme Court stuck based on one of the factor is Article 50, that executive shouldn't have any role in appointment of judiciary. And second thing, mode of appointment. So right now also we have collegium system. We don't have NJAC, where the council, Supreme Court judges and CJI, four Supreme Court judges and CJI will recommend the names to the president, and president will approve it. Okay, that is appointment. So that way also they are getting independence. And third one, security of tenure. So once you are appointed, what is important? Your security of tenure. And this is established by granting the retirement age itself. So until you retire, you can act as a judge. And finally, fixed service conditions. So this is something again important. You can't alter the service conditions of judges by parliament law to the disadvantage of judges. So that is a fourth provision. And then finally, removal. So the removal process here also very tough. If you can see here, it has to be first taken up as a motion, and then it has to be passed by special majority, and then an inquiry will be there, and then will be removed. So that's why it is very difficult to remove Supreme Court judges. So that's why this is also very important to ensure independence. And then you have expenses directly charged from consolidated fund. That means Supreme Court need not depend on salaries for central government, from central government. So that they are directly charged from consolidated fund. And then you have the judges' conduct cannot be discussed in parliament or legislature. So judges' power or conduct cannot be discussed. And then you have ban, as we have discussed already. And finally, you have power to punish for its contempt. This is very important. If you see in the recent news, like just 2 days before, Prashant Bhushan, I believe, yes. So he's an activist who is punished very recently for criticizing the judiciary. So this falls under the 9th provision. Okay. And finally, it has its jurisdiction cannot be curtailed. So parliament by law cannot reduce the jurisdiction of Supreme Court. It can only increase it. Okay, this also remember, it can increase it, but it cannot decrease it. So that is again ensures independence of judiciary. And finally, these are the 3 cases where the Supreme Court judges were appointed after retirement. Like it happened after 1970 with Hidayatullah appointed as vice president, and then you can see the Rajya Sabha nomination, and finally Sadashivam as governor of Kerala. And after that, now after decades, now this Supreme Court CJI was nominated as Rajya Sabha member. So that's why these provisions are very important, because this is the first time it's happening after many years. So kindly see these statements once again. That's why third statement is also correct here. So the answer is C, 1 and 2 and 3. Now so sixth one here, consider the following statements related to National Human Rights Commission. First one, it can inquire sumoto or on a petition presented to it by a victim or any person on his behalf, or on a direction or order of any court for violation of human rights. Second one, NHRC while inquiring into any case shall have power of civil court trying a suit under the Code of Civil Procedure 1908. And then NHRC has its own independent investigation machinery, but its recommendations are not binding on government. So kindly, these are again statements with a kind of traps present in them. So kindly read once again them carefully and then mark your answer. Kindly mark your answer so that you will, if you commit a mistake, then you will be able to remember that mistake for a long time, because this is what is important. You all have to do as many mistakes as possible before prelims. Only by that you will reduce the actual mistakes in the real exam. So here, coming back to the question, the context is basically, you all know there was a big migration crisis during the COVID time. After the lockdown, you have seen many migrants living on roads, and there are huge human rights violations. They didn't have food and all. So that's why NHRC was prominently questioned at that time. Why NHRC was not acting? What is the need of this institution if it doesn't act or provide relief at such kind of crisis situations? So that's why remember this year from prelims and even from mains also, NHRC is very, very, very important institution. So first statement is absolutely correct. It can inquire sumoto or by petition or even when a court asks it to do the investigation. So the first statement is correct here. Second statement is also correct. NHRC, even though a statutory body, it has almost powers of a civil court. So powers of civil court in the uh, terms like it can ask anyone to appear before it, it can ask anyone to give evidence, it can ask anyone to give testimony. So this is the powers of civil court, but it doesn't have any powers to like contempt or criminal court. Okay, so that's why second statement is absolutely correct. Whereas the third statement is wrong here. This is one of the limitations of NHRC. So National Human Rights Commission is usually called toothless tiger. Why? Because it doesn't have any independent investigation machinery. For example, if it has any police torture case, it has to rely again on police only to investigate that case. It doesn't have its own machinery to investigate the case. So it has to depend on either central government or state government resources. So that's why third statement is the major limitation. Even though the second part is correct, where it is saying, but its recommendations are not binding on government. Yes, its recommendations are also not binding on the government. So that is again another limitation. So this way, UPSC also might give you a one correct statement in the one part of statement correct and another part wrong in the same statement. So don't go by only parts. Read the entire statement carefully and twice before marking your option. So here the answer is A, 1 and 2. So coming back to the context, you have already seen that, we have already discussed it. So this again is not a constitutional body. So kindly remember, it is a statutory body. So it is made according to the act called Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. Similarly, we have certain other bodies also, like National Commission for ST, National Commission for SC, and this time National Commission for Backward Classes. This is also very important. So this is brought by constitutional amendment. So kindly, if you have time, research about that also. Okay, so these are the commissions that are very important. So here we'll see first functions and then powers. So if you see the functions, what are the functions that are allocated for this body? First thing, we have already discussed, it can go by sumoto on its own or based on other court uh, or if a complaint is filed by victim on violation of human rights. Second thing, if there is any proceeding in any court in the allegation of violation of human rights, then with the approval of that court, it can take that case because it is specialized in dealing with human rights violation. And third thing, it can visit any jail or any authority that is under the state and central government where it can study the human rights violation. This is how usually in the media it comes, like how the prisoners are kept, what are the conditions that are worse and all. And then finally, the constitutional safeguards that are provided for human rights can also be reviewed and can be suggested to be improved by this commission. And international conventions are there, like some of the conventions will come up. For example, Covenant on Political and Economic Rights or some UN Human Rights Convention. These are for which India is part of. So it will also study those treaties and will try to make India complied to that treaty by suggesting certain changes. And finally, it takes up case studies and research studies. So these are the main functions that are allocated to the NHRC. Okay, now we'll see the powers. So powers, basically it has the powers of civil court that we have already discussed, like it can ask anyone to give evidence, affidavit, testimony and all. And then finally, the limitations. This is again very, very important, especially from mains point of view. First limitation is that it has only advisory capacity. It can only advise. Its recommendations are not binding. Okay. Second thing, it doesn't have any own mechanism of investigation. And third thing, if a human rights violation happens, then it has to be reported to NHRC within 1 year. If 1 year if 1 year is passed, then NHRC will not take that case. So that is again very big flaw in the NHRC. And then finally, the if there are violations that are committed by armed forces, they will be dealt separately, and NHRC has no scope to deal with them. So this is also brought a huge backlash in Jammu and Kashmir and Northeast. So these are the important limitations of NHRC and the reason why it is called toothless tiger. Now we'll go with the seventh one. So seventh one, consider the following statements with respect to Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. So now again this question, like why this question came, why especially Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights? This is because it is for the first time this body intervened in India by asking Supreme Court to include it also as a party to the case against Citizenship Amendment Act. So this is the first time an international institute has intervened in Supreme Court proceedings. So that is why this is very, very, very important for this year. So the first statement, the High Commissioner for Human Rights is a principal human rights official of United Nations. Okay. And second one, UN Human Rights is part of United Nations Secretariat and is headquartered in Geneva in Switzerland. And third one, it has right to intervene in any country's court proceedings. So kindly read these statements carefully and go with the one which you find very extreme. Usually in UPS also there are some statements which are of moderate where you can't judge, but some statements will be extreme. Either they will be too extreme or too easy. So these are the statements that should generate suspicion for you. So here also mark your answer and then we'll see the statements. So here if you see the third statement is such kind of extreme statement. Here it is saying it can intervene in any country's court proceedings. So this is basically against sovereignty principle. So no organization is allowed to interfere. So that's why third statement is wrong. Here I'm saying in any country. If it have been certain exceptions, it would have specified that. So the third statement is wrong here. So once the third statement is wrong, then you can straight away go with B, 2 and 3 because you all know, or none of the above might be still possibility, but 2 and 3 is the right answer here. So here the first statement is correct. This High Commissioner is the person who is the principal human rights official. Under him only this officer of High Commissioner for Human Rights is there. And apart from that, there is another organization called UN Human Rights Council. Okay, UN Human Rights Council is one organization, and Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights is another one within the United Nations, which are very important for human rights point of view. And second statement is also correct, where it is part of Secretariat and present in Geneva. So answer is A here. Now we'll see this in bit detail, like where it works and all. So context we have already seen, like where it asked the Supreme Court in a case against CIA to admit that organization as amicus curiae. This is also very important. Amicus curiae is a provision where a court consider that party as friend of the court. So by that category, Supreme Court can take suggestions and also that party can give reports and all, based on which Supreme Court can take informed decisions. Okay. And this Office of Human Rights, High Commissioner for Human Rights is a leading entity and is it entrusted with the mandate to promote and protect human rights of the people. So under this mandate only to protect the human rights, it is saying it is intervening. So whereas India is saying it is basically violating sovereignty principle by setting a wrong precedent. And another thing, there are three important pillars of United Nations. This also you have to important note down. One is peace and security, second one human rights, and third one development. In development you have all these programs like UNDP, you have UNESCAP, all this. Whereas in peace and security you have UN peacekeeping force, United Nations Security Council, all this. Whereas in human rights is also very important and usually neglected, but it is very important, under which we have UN Human Rights Council and Officer of High Commissioner for Human Rights. Okay, so those are the three pillars on which United Nations is based, and rest of all the information we have already discussed. And these are kind of three divisions. This you don't need to remember, but just have a glance like how it works with the divisions. Okay, so that is it with Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. Now we'll go with the next topic. So this is the last question for the day, and then we have one or more additional topic. I guess this is the last one. Let's see. So eighth one, consider the following provisions of, oh, this one is already discussed, I believe, right? Okay, this might be a duplication. Yeah, so this is the eighth question. So the ACE2 receptor that is constantly in the news is associated to which of the following? So if all of you have been feeling that all are difficult question, so this is a kind of very, very easy question. So you would have already seen the news, then you would have marked this answer. So kindly see the statement. So ACE2 receptor is associated with first one, CCMB design new ventilator or is it a new antigen based test developed, or third one, mechanism through which corona attacks human body, or the fourth one, vaccine being developed by Oxford. So this is very straightforward. Answer is C. So you would have already known the mechanism. Like when corona enters, corona virus, you know that there is a certain spikes called spike protein. That spike protein needs to have a receiver. So that receiver is this ACE2 receptor. So that is present in our body, and this spike protein is a kind of key. So this ACE2 receptor is a kind of lock. So this key protein will be inserted in that lock, and once it opens, the virus enters into that cell and damages that cell and replicates, and that's how virus expands. So remember, ACE2 is a receptor, is a lock kind of thing, and key is the protein of that virus. And now whatever the vaccines we are developing, we're basically developing to kill those proteins that are present on the virus, or to develop immune system to kill those proteins. And second thing, tests. The tests are also developed based on the protein signature. Okay, so these are kind of important technical things about coronavirus. So this is the way usually UPSC also asks. It doesn't explain, it straight away gives the technical term and asks how it is associated. So that is why I have mentioned it. So this is again bit in detail. So usually what happens is, for virus to enter the body, you all know virus doesn't have its own body. It needs another cell to basically get the source of proteins or this thing, raw materials, and then uses the same cell as a host and then replicates. So that's why it has to enter any cell. So to enter any cell, this kind of ACE2 enzyme is needed. And this ACE2 receptor is basically attached to our outer surface or cell membranes of basically cells in lungs, arteries, heart, kidney, and intestines. So that's why coronavirus is usually also found in all these areas. First main entry point is lungs, because that is the first passage through air, and then you have intestines by food. So this is how it enters through the exterior or um, the upper cells. And then what is the main function of ACE2 receptor? It is mainly to lower the blood pressure. Okay, that is important. So this is not news because of the corona, it is already there. It is basically an kind of enzyme that is to reduce blood pressure, but that is being used by the coronavirus to enter into our body. So the structure of and everything else we have discussed, like how it becomes the entry point and all. So kindly see once again these kind of technical terms like ACE2, spike protein. So here you have this. The key is called spike protein or S protein. Okay. So kindly see these all technical terms as further study, because they will not focus on corona as such, but on the technical terms. And then finally, the last important topic that happened in March last week. You all know, like in the March last week, the lockdown started. So just after the lockdown, there was a famous Mitro speech, and then followed by a famous package. So this was the package, and this is very important to note down the schemes that are there part of the package. So first response was this: Financial Minister announced 1.7 lakh package under the heading called Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyana Yojana. So under this, these are the schemes. What are those schemes? First one, Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. So under this, you have to remember the static part, like where we have already National Food Security Act that mandates that you have to give food to about 75% of the population roughly. Okay. Apart from that, under this Anna Yojana, they are providing additional 5 kgs of wheat or rice and also protein of pulses. So that is Anna Yojana. And then you have insurance scheme for the first time extended to health workers so that they can attend the duties. And third one, they have granted direct cash benefit transfer to the poor and vulnerable section. So in the poor, all the like below poverty line people are covered, and in the vulnerable sections, Divyangs and old age people are covered. So that's how they have directly transferred the amount. And then finally, you have the contributions, benefits for the workers employed in organized sector. So in here, the government said we will maintain the jobs by providing EPF contribution of the employer by the government itself. And then finally, in the center state coordination, there are schemes like district district mineral funds, or there are certain kinds of health cess. So these are the funds that are there. Those are utilized with the coordination of state and center for purchasing the PPE kits and other medical emergencies. Okay, so these are the first initial response scheme. And in the coming months, we will see the other plans, how the other response plan, and then Atmanirbhar Bharat, how they came up, and what are the components of it.